Hello and welcome to Narayana IS. I am Pratik, your faculty for daily news analysis. Students, in today's DNA session, we are going to focus on 5 most important topics from the Hindu newspaper. Right? Before we understand the 5 topics, let us go through a motivational quote so that you're motivated enough to understand all the 5 topics and ultimately ace the examination. Right? So today's motivation quote, I have not failed. I have just found 1,000 or 10,000 ways that won't work. Which means do not be afraid of failing. Your failure will teach you many things. So whenever you fail, just try to introspect and try to understand the things that you have learned out of your failure. So don't be bogged down because of failure. Let's say if you do not crack the examination in the first attempt, so do not be bogged down. Calm down, try to learn from your mistakes, and if you introspect and learn from your mistakes, you will definitely ace the examination. Right? So again, those students who want to excel in the examination, Narayana IS has introduced 1 year and 2 year integrated course, that is prelims cum mains. So the QR code that you can see on the screen, I request you to please scan the QR code, fill all the required details, and our team will get back to you. Please make sure that you are scanning the QR code, right? Be rest assured, each and everything that you require to clear the examination, we at Narayana IS will make sure, will ensure you get each and every help from our side, which will help you to clear the examination. On this note, let us get started with the topics of the day. The first topic is taken from Hindu page number 7, right? This talks about the challenges the workers in the informal sector or the gig workers are facing, right? The second topic is taken from Hindu page number 5. Now, in this article, we'll understand which are the laws, which are the rules, which are the constitutional provisions that regulate the places of worship, the different religious institutions in our country. The third article is taken from Hindu page number 1. Here the Supreme Court is saying the jurisdiction, the powers of the Lokpal institution. The fourth article is taken from Hindu page number 9. In this, the Election Commission of India has kick-started the process of linking the Aadhaar with the voter ID cards. So we'll understand more about Election Commission, the Representation of People Act, right? And the fifth topic we are taken for snippet, that is the BSNL, that is this article talks about the reliance of the governments on the consultancies for, let's say, to bring reforms in the governing mechanism, right? So these are the 5 topics of the day. Let us start with the first topic, and the title is the dystopian side of Insta-commerce. Dystopian side of Insta-commerce, and this topic will understand the labor reforms, and then you can map this topic under GS paper 2, that is important aspects of governance. Now, there's a question asked in the year 2021. Examine the role of gig economy in the process of empowerment of women in India. Gig, which means informal sector. So you'll understand each and everything, each and every dimension, aspects in this topic. So, what is the context? Now, students, the India's labor laws, the laws meant for the laborers in our country, they have mainly protected the formal sector workers. The labor laws have protected the formal sector workers, which means the workers who work in the formal sector, they have job security, They have minimum wages and social benefits like pension, maternity, paternity leaves, etc. But unfortunately, right, the workers who are part of informal sector, they are not given the same protection as given to the formal sector. For example, the people who work in the government or let's say the multinational companies, they get job security, the wages are fixed, every year they get a minimum hike, social benefits, government holidays. But people who work in the informal sector, which means working on a contractual basis, for example, the street vendors, they do not get any of these benefits. Now we know that the digital platforms in our country are growing, isn't it? Which digital platform? For example, we have Swiggy, we have Insta. There's so many digital platforms. Now, these digital platforms have created unregulated workforce. What? Unregulated or let's say gig workforce, which means they have created a class of workers who do not have any benefits. For example, the delivery riders, the delivery guys who courier or let's say who get your food from the hotels, the home service providers, the urban company service providers, they do not get any protection as the workers in the formal sector get, which means the unregulated workforce or the gig workers, which means temporary workers, they operate as a piece rate system. These they operate as piece rate. Who? The gig workers, the temporary workers, they work as piece rate system, which means the workers compete for low paying jobs. They compete for low paying jobs without any job security, minimum wages, or let's say social security benefits. Now, some Indian states, right, some Indian states have tried to make laws to protect the gig workers, temporary workers. But the corporates, the big companies, they have ensured that the gig workers are not protected, which means the big companies, they influence the decision making of the government. Because if benefits are given to the gig workers, the profit percentage of the big companies will come down. So the corporates, the lobbying done by the corporates is actually slowing down the process. And that's the reason the laws meant for the empowerment of laborers must be restructured, which means restructured in a way to cover the gig workers, which means each and every worker, irrespective whether they are part of formal sector or informal sector, they receive basic rights, minimum wages, and most importantly, social security. Most importantly, social security. I hope you understood the context. Now, let us try to understand India's labor market. Size of labor force. Now, India has the second largest labor force globally, not in India, but globally. We have close to 600 million workers as of 2023 and 2024. China has the largest workforce. Now, formal versus informal sector. Now, over 65 percentage, how much? 65 percentage of India's workforce, right? They are in the informal sector, which means they do not have any job security, no minimum wages, no social protection. Despite the fact that a major chunk of the Indian workforce is in the informal sector, the informal sector is contributing 50 percentage to India's GDP. So informal sector, the people who are part of informal sector without any benefits, they are contributing half the amount to India's GDP. Talking about the global informal economy. Talking about the global economy, now more than 60% of the world's workforce across the countries, more than 60%, and 80% of the businesses, they operate in the informal sector. More than 50%, they work in the informal sector. And overall, the 60% people who are in the informal sector, they are contributing 40% to the world's GDP. Talking about India, 85% people are employed in the informal sector. Now, if I talk about the sectoral composition, right? India's workforce is spread across agriculture. In agriculture, close to 41% people are employed in agriculture. Then in industries, that is manufacturing sector, we have close to 25%. And then finally in the services sector, we have close to 32% workforce. While agriculture, we see that it remains the largest employer, its share is declining. While the industry and the services sector, they are expanding. Now talking about the employment growth, the workers who are part of informal sector, especially in the manufacturing and the services sector, there is growth in the employment. There is 10%, for example, in the year 24-25, the year 24-25 saw 10% growth as compared to 23 and 24 in the informal sector. But most of the jobs are low paying and very unstable. Talking about the quality and quantity, of employment, the key issue is not just unemployment but poor job quality. 94% of informal workers, they earn less than 10,000 rupees. They face income uncertainty. Plus they have to work for long hours, and unfortunately they have to work in unsafe conditions. They do not have any pensions, no social security benefit, no legal protections, nothing. And that's the reason we need labor reforms. Why do we need? See, despite being one of the fastest growing economies, we are the third largest economy in the world. We struggle with low income, semi-skilled jobs. And that's the reason we need reforms. We need structured reforms so as to increase formalization in the jobs, which means that workers should get fair wages, which should be more than minimum wages. They should get social security benefits. That's the reason we need reforms. Now, this is the difference. These are the difference between formal sector and the informal sector. Now, they have legal recognition, legal protection, which means the workers who are working in the formal sector, if their rights are violated, they can approach the judiciary. But people in the informal sector do not have such legal right. Then they have fixed working hours. So please go through it. You'll understand the difference between workers working in the formal sector and informal sector. And the workers who are working in the informal sector constitute close to 85 to 90% of the workforce. Only 10% people are working in the formal sector, and we have to increase formalization in the informal sector. Now, let us try to understand the framework regarding the labor in India. Which are the frameworks or laws that regulate the labors in our country? First, labor in the concurrent list, which means that both the central government and state government can make laws on the labor laws. However, some matters are exclusively reserved for the central government. Talking about the judicial interpretation, right? Now, in the in the Randhir Singh versus Union of India, in this case, right? The Supreme Court ruled that equal pay for equal work is not explicitly mentioned in the equal pay for equal is not explicitly mentioned in the Indian Constitution. It is a constitutional goal under Article 14, 16 and Article 39C. It is not explicitly mentioned, but it is indirectly mentioned under Article 14, 16 and 39C. Article 14 is fundamental right which guarantees equality before the law. In the eyes of the law, each and everyone are equal. Article 16, it provides equal opportunities in public employment. And then Article 39C, which is part of directive principle, it states that the economic system should be designed in such a way which should prevent concentration of wealth in the hands of few people, which means it tries to ensure fairness in the society. I hope you understood these uh, judicial provisions, right? Constitutional provisions. Now, the labor codes in our country, right? Now, see, now India had many laws governing the labors of a country. We had close to 29 central laws framed by the central government. Now, to simplify and modernize the labor laws, right? The government merged all the 29, right? The government merged all the 29 central laws into 4 codes, which means codification of the labor laws. But these are the labor codes. We'll understand one by one. In brief, what are these labor codes? So all the 29 laws were merged into 4 labor codes. Unfortunately, their implementation is pending. Why? Because of the delays in the states. Because of the delays in the different states. Right? So these new labor codes, what they do is they try to consolidate the overlapping laws. For example, there are provisions which were overlapping in 29 or different laws under the 29 central laws. So, to reduce the legal complexity, to reduce the contradiction, overlapping, right, the 29 central laws were consolidated into 4 labor codes. And first one is the wage code. Wage, which means salary, money. The central government will set a floor wage, which means a minimum, a bracket, a ceiling, floor wage. Now, what is this floor wage? Which means this floor wage will be working as baseline. The different states must set minimum wages above this level. The states must set minimum wages above this level and revise them every 5 years. Overtime pay, if the workers are working more than the uh, mentioned working hours, then they must be paid at least twice the normal wage. And if the employer is deducting the wage, it cannot exceed 50% of the total wages. This wage code also ensures there is no gender discrimination, in the payment of wage, which means equal pay for equal work. Then we have code on industrial relations. Now, the companies having 300 or more workers, they must seek a government permission before, let's say if a company wants to close the business or lay off people, or let's say then they have to seek the permission from the government. There will be industrial tribunals, which means courts. Why? In case the workers have, or let's say there's a conflict between the employer and employees, we have industrial tribunals. Then we have code on social security, which means a social security fund. A social security fund will be created by the central and the state governments to support the unorganized or informal or the gig workers, right? And then we have the code on occupational safety, health and working conditions, which means occupational safety, there will be a board, which will be established, right, at the national and state level. Why? To monitor the workplace, and this code will be applicable to or applicable with more than 10 workers, and it states that employers who the employers The employers provide essential welfare facilities, which means clean drinking water, clean washroom, to ensure the well-being of the employees or well-being of the workers. But these were the laws meant for the empowerment of laborers. But there are certain loopholes, certain problems or loopholes labor in the labor codes. Which are this? One, inspector cum facilitator role, which means a person who will be inspecting, who will be facilitating, which means facilitating, that is labor laws, will also inspect, which means that now these are the gray areas, which means the four labor codes, right? This labor codes, it actually creates a new role, which is inspector cum facilitator role. This he'll be one person. He'll be responsible for both. One is enforcing compliance and also assisting business in meeting the regulations. So here he's helping the business people as well as the workers. The problem is it will create conflict of interest, which means it weakens the enforcement of the labor codes. How can one person, serve the interests of both the business class as well as the workers? This is gray area. This leads to conflict of interest. Then lack of clarity in defining workers and employers. Who are workers and employers? The labor codes do not clearly define the categories like who are workers, who are employees, or let's say who are gig workers. Result, it leads to confusion. Confusion, for example, when it comes to overtime compensation. The rules are different for the workers, employees, gig workers. Then it leads to confusion in the classification of workers. Then it also leads to confusion in the rights of the remote workers, right? Especially the workers who work in a changed or let's say different environments, changing work environment. Next, exclusion of small startups and informal sector. Small startups, what does it mean? It means that employees of the small startups, the MSMEs, and let's say the companies with less than 300 workers are not covered, which means they do not get the social security benefits. The migrants moving from one state or one place to another place is self-employed people, and the workers who are working in the rural setups, rural sort of companies in the established in the rural areas, they remain largely excluded. And this allows the companies to introduce or let's say add arbitrary service condition which suits the companies more than the workers. This is another gray area. Then non-exclusion of charitable or non-profit based establishments, charitable institutions. For example, the purpose of the charitable institutions is to provide charity to the, let's say, vulnerable society or vulnerable groups. Now, especially the fourth code, the code on the occupational, right? Occupational safe health and working conditions, the fourth code, it does not apply to charitable and non-profit organizations. And India is lacking a central law to regulate the labor in the charity sector, which means the people who work in the charity companies or let's say charity institutions, which means the workers who are working in the charity institutions, they do not have any protection. Then no recognition for invisible labor. Now, who are the invisible labor? For example, there is unpaid work such as child care, the household chores, right? Mothers and daughters and sisters, they work in the house. The elderly care, this is mainly performed by women. They are not recognized in the labor codes. They are invisible labor. They remain unregulated and unprotected despite being essential to economic and social stability. So, without legal protection, there are millions, thousands, and lakhs of invisible laborers who continue to contribute to the economy without enjoying any protection, without enjoying any rights or any benefits. Now, quickly we'll understand the different challenges posed by the informal labor market. First is difficult or a very challenging employment. Now, especially the street vendors or the people who work in the agriculture sector, especially the small or the workers, agriculture laborers who work on the farm of or who work on the land of the farmers or who have a very small land holding. They face seasonal unemployment. Let's say if there's no rain, the crops get destroyed. And the laborers who are working on the farms of other farmers, they earn very little wage. Why? Because there's no regulation. These people do not have any bargaining power, and this leads to this leads to income inequality and poverty. Next is sustainable livelihoods. What does it mean? It means that the absence of job contracts, it makes it difficult to ensure a stable and equitable employment. For whom? For the informal workers. And this leaves them without any job security. Social vulnerability, which means the people who earn very little wages, including the home-based workers, the street vendors. Now, these people have actually limited access to healthcare. They do not have any access to social security and or let's say education, which means these people are often trapped in the cycle of low social status, and then they have to work extremely hard. Then there are also occupational hazards. For example, the people who work or let's say who picks or let's say collects the waste, the waste pickers, or let's say the recyclers, they face very difficult working conditions because whenever they let's say collect the waste, there are glass bottles, there are so many let's say syringes, and they are exposed to very let's say hazardous materials, and unfortunately they have no safety measures. Then we know that child labor in our country is also is widespread. Then the institutional challenges. Now the informal workers, right, they do not get any legal protection. We have discussed this, and this makes them vulnerable to harassment, which means the companies, the authorities, they harass the weak people. They harass the weak people. Why? Because there are no institutions dedicated meant for protecting the informal workers. So these are some of the challenges faced by the informal workers. Now, these are the schemes the government has introduced for the informal laborers. First is Pradhan Mantri Jeevan Jyoti Bima Yojana. Bima, which is insurance, which means this scheme provides insurance coverage to people who earn low wages. For example, people who are in the informal sector. For example, they provide financial support to the families in case a member of informal sector dies. Then we have Pradhan Mantri Shram Yogi Man Dhan. Now this is a pension scheme. It is designed for people working in the informal sector, which means they are provided financial security after retirement. Right? Then we have Atal Pension Yojana. Again, this is a government-backed pension scheme that encourages informal sector workers to save for retirement, which means whatever they earn, if they save, let's say 5%, 10%, right, in the Atal pension scheme, then the government contributes the same amount in their pension fund. And then we have the e-Shram portal. Now, what is this? This one is a national database for all the workers working in the informal sector. This portal will help the government to integrate them into the formal welfare schemes. The workers who are registered on the portal, they receive a e-Shram card. This will serve as identity card for, let's say, accessing benefits, let's say education, health, pension, etc. So these are some of the important schemes meant for the empowerment of the informal workers. And then we also have these schemes. Now please open the DNA notes. Each and every scheme has been mentioned with details, or let's say the purpose, the objective of the scheme is mentioned in the DNA notes. So I request you to please open the link of the DNA notes in the comment section and please understand what are these schemes and their objectives, right? Now, and then these are the labor codes again meant for the empowerment of the informal workers. So what is the way forward? What are the things that we need to work on in order to empower the informal sector workers? One, we have to establish what? Vocational training centers. Vocational training centers, which means we have to, let's say, establish, recognize accrediting agencies. The agencies, or let's say the institutions that are accredited. Why? For vocational training. This is essential to strengthen, or let's say empower the India's workforce, especially in the informal sector. So there should be a structured framework, right? This should be a framework should be built to interlink vocational training with academic education, which means academic education should not be isolated and it should be linked with the vocational training, because this will allow seamless movement between education and, let's say, skill based training. The next is social security. Now the state government should enact or should draft a very detailed law for the informal sector. This should ensure what? One, resource allocation, then benefits and institutional mechanism, right? Essentially, which means there should be essential welfare services like compensation for, let's say, workplace accidents, death benefits, age old pension, the schemes that we just discussed. This should be provided under a structured framework, for the informal sector workers. Then the employment information service. Now, to enhance the, or to improve the guarantees of employment, especially in the backward districts. Employment information service. Employment information service should be digitally strengthened. How? Through e-governance. Which means workers should have easy access to job opportunities from both the public and the private sector. This will ensure greater employment outreach, especially at the grassroots level. And finally, we have to integrate problem solving with a forward looking approach, which essentially means that while the new labor codes, the 4 labor codes that we just discussed, it addresses the grievances of the past and to restore the justice for workers. It is very crucial to adopt a futuristic approach to, let's say, tackle the emerging challenges. Now, which are the emerging challenges? For example, the automation, the robotics, the artificial powered workforces, or let's say the bioengineering. Now we have to actually tackle the challenges, that is tackle the impact of these automation or technologies. These challenges should be anticipated and policy should be framed, evolved to protect the rights of the workers in the changing employment landscape, which is influenced highly by technology. So this is the way forward. I hope you understood the first chapter. We have discussed each and every dimension. If you get a question on labor laws or labor reforms, each and every dimension has been covered holistically in this particular topic, right? Next, Yadagirigutta to have Temple Trust Board soon. Now, what is it? This article talks about the laws that governs the religious institutions in our country. You can map this with paper 2. So, how do the Indian debates on secularism differ from the debates in the West? Now, you know that the secularism in our country is different from secularism followed in the West. In the West, there is strict separation between state and religion. In India, the state can intervene in the religious matters, right? So, what is the context that the Telangana Assembly has passed this bill? Which bill? Charitable and Hindu Religious Institutions and Endowments Bill 2025. Now, this bill, this law will allow the formation of temple trust, which means there will be a trust board to manage this particular temple. Which temple? The temple that we discuss in the title. Yadagirigutta. Just like we have a board for the Tirupati temple, which means now this Yadagirigutta temple will have a board to manage the affairs of the temple. This bill, right, it mandates the formation of trust board. What? There will be a trust board. Why? For temples, for any temples that earn over 100 crores annually. The purpose is to improve the governance and ensure there is administrative efficiency. Now, Telangana has close to 2,500 temples, and these temples are classified based on revenue and management structures. Now, some temples are under the Mutt administration, while others fall directly under the state or the control of the state. Now, this bill, right, the bill introduced in the Telangana Assembly, it highlights the government regulation of religious institutions. This is a practice which is similar to other states. It ensures that there is structured management, which means when it comes to financial accountability, there is structured management. The topic that we are going to discuss, right, it provides insights into the temple administration, which means how the funds are managed, when and how the state can intervene, which means it offers a broader perspective to understand how the religious institutions in our country are governed or managed. There are so many temples, so many religious institutions belonging to different faiths: Hindus, Muslims, Christians, Sikhs. Who controls these institutions? Let us discuss first about the Hindu temples. The Hindu temples. One, the government control, which means many Hindu temples are managed by the state governments. The central government has no say when it comes to temples. It is the state government. Every state government will control the temples falling within that particular state. The laws granting, which means the laws allow the states to have authority over the administration of the temple. Now, in Tamil Nadu, we have the Hindu Religious and Charitable Endowments Department. This is a department in Tamil Nadu that looks after the temples in Tamil Nadu. Similarly, in Andhra Pradesh, to manage the Tirupati temple, we have the Tirumala Tirupati Devasthanam Board, which is a trust board too, which looks into the management of the temples in our or in the state of Andhra to look after the Tirupati temple. So, there can be one law to look after many temples, or there can be a separate law, a specific law to look after a specific religious institution. It depends on the importance of that religious institution. Income utilization, which means that the revenue from major temples is often used to maintain smaller temples and also to fund the social welfare programs, for example, including hospitals, orphanages, and also education institutions. The money that the temple generate is used for social welfare. Legal framework, we have Article 25 Clause 2. This article, which is a part of fundamental right, it allows the state to intervene. This provision allows the state to intervene in the religious institutions. Why? To regulate the and economic and social activities. What? Economic and social activities. To manage the economy the temple is generating as well as social welfare. Now, as per the census 2011, the Hindu temples make up the majority of India's religious institutions, which are close to 30 lakh in our country. Of the 30 lakh religious institutions in our country, the Hindu temples they make or they constitute the majority in the 30 lakh institutions that we have as per census 2011. Which means for the Hindu temples, what we understood is, we have understood that there are state government provisions that manage the temples in our country. What about the Muslims and Christians? Again, the religious institutions of Muslims and Christians, they are managed by community based, which means these communities, the community itself establishes trust or board. Which means, for example, a Muslim institution, let's say a mosque, is managed by a trust which is established by that community. In the Hindus, we saw that the state government, the government is actually establishing institution, but here we see that the state governments, which means the people of that community, are establishing institutions. They function independently of the government control. They also have financial autonomy. For example, we have the Waqf Board. Now, this Waqf Board, right? This board, it manages the properties of Muslims. They manage mosques, dargahs, the madrasas, and all the properties associated with the Muslims across India. Now, they also operate under the state and the central law, but they have financial and let's say administrative autonomy as well. Then we have, let's say, then again the Christians also have a, let's say, a separate board, a separate trust to manage the church or the all the churches in our country. Talking about the Sikh, Jain and Buddhist temples, again they are managed by the people of their community. For example, the administration of Sikh, Jain and Buddhist places, it varies across states. Now, some temples are regulated by the government, the others can also operate under the religious trust or board established by the people of their community. Now, let us try to understand the state legislation. State legislation. Now, please understand that the religious endowments and the institutions that are falling under the religious endowments, they fall under the concurrent list. What does it mean? Which means both the central government and the state government can make laws for managing the religious endowments. Which means different state government can have different rules to manage the religious institutions. As I discussed that there are some states that have enacted a law to maintain just one temple. For example, the Sri Mata Vaishno Devi Shrine Act of 1988, which manages the Vaishno Devi temple in Jammu and Kashmir alone. So there can be one law to manage many temples or one law just to manage one temple, like we have for the Tirupati temple or the Vaishno Devi temple. Now, let us try to understand the historical background. How were the religious or places of religious institutions managed before independence? The first one, the East India Company's temple interference. East India Company's temple interference, which means when India was governed by the East India Company. Now, the British enacted laws in Bengal, Madras, and Bombay. It allowed for state interference. The state could interference in temple administration to prevent the misuse of the temple funds. Again, here from 1800 itself, right, the state had the power authority to intervene. Then we have the religious endowment. This act was enacted in the year 1863. Now, this law actually aimed to secularize the temple management. How? By transferring the control to committees established to manage the religious institution. But the government retained influence through legal provisions. The power was given to the committees, but the government had the overarching power over the religious institutions. Then we have the Madras Hindu Religious Endowment Act of 1925. Now, this was established, or this act established the Hindu Religious and Charitable Endowment Board. This gave provincial governments, that is the state governments, the power to regulate temples under the supervision of the board of commissioners. In short, please try to understand that before independence, the British had framed laws like these laws meant for the state or the mandate of these laws was for the state to intervene in the religious institutions. So the interference of the state in the religious institutions is not something that we see only after independence. It predates the constitution, or let's say independence of a country as well. Now, post independence, we have the Law Commission's recommendation, which was given in the year 1950. It recommended laws, which means the Law Commission recommended that we need to have laws to prevent the misuse of temple funds. And this led to the establishment of Tamil Nadu uh, Hindu Religious and Endowment Act of 1951. Right? Now, this law was enacted in the year 1951 in the state of Tamil Nadu. This actually act, the Hindu Religious and Charitable Endowment Act, it created a department of Hindu Religious and Charitable Endowment in the state of Tamil Nadu. This endowment act or this board was responsible for regulating or managing the temples, or let's say protection, or let's say preservation of the temples in Tamil Nadu. Then we also have a law which was established in the state of Bihar, which means every state have laws meant for the, let's say, regulation or regulating the temples falling under the state in the state. Now, talking about the constitutional provision, we have discussed the constitutional provision, right? Article 25. Now, Article 25, it guarantees individuals the right to practice, profess and propagate the religion. They can practice religion they want. But this right is subject, which means this does not mean they have the right to convert people to other religion. The right they get under Article 25 subject to public order, which means the religion should not create disturbance in the society. Or let's say the religion or any religious activity should not be immoral. Then state regulation, which means the state can also regulate. Now, under clause 2 of Article 25, the state has the power to regulate the economic, financial, political, or let's say the secular activities associated with the religious practices. It also allows the state for social welfare and reforms. It ensures that the Hindu religious institutions they remain open to all classes of Hindus and not just be limited to the elite section of the Hindus. Now here you need to understand the difference between regulation and worship. The state can regulate the secular aspects of religious practices, but the right to worship, it remains protected. Which essentially means, for example, let's say if a temple or let's say a religious institution does not allow men, women to enter the religious temple, then in this case the state can intervene. They can regulate the secular aspects of the religious practices. But when it comes to right to worship, it remains protected. So you have the right to worship any deity that you want to. But when it comes to any unethical practice, an ethical practice, let's say for example triple talaq. Now triple talaq was discriminatory against women. So the state intervened and declared that triple talaq is unconstitutional. Right? Now, now there's a growing demand. Though the demand is not new, the demand is old, but there's a growing demand that the temple should be freed from the state control. For example, the Rashtriya Sangha in the year 1959, right? They were the first to demand the removal of the government control over the temples. Then we have the Kashi Vishwanath temple case of 1959. Now this, the Akhil Bhartiya, right, Parishad, they requested the Uttar Pradesh government to return the Kashi Vishwanath temple's management to Hindus. It is under the state control. It opposed the monopolization of the state of the religious affairs. Then recently in the year 2023, the Madhya Pradesh government, they took steps to reduce the control of the state on the temples, which means it reflects a growing demand for reassessing the government control over the religious institutions. Now, some people say that state should control the religious places. Some people say that it should not be controlled. For example, now people who are in favor of state control, what they say is first one is to prevent the mismanagement, which means it is important for the state to control to ensure transparency in the temple fund, be it administration or let's say to prevent the misuse of funds. Then it is important for the state to have control so as to ensure that all classes of society, all classes, people belonging to each and every caste should have the access to enter each and every temple. That's the reason state control is important. Welfare activities, which means it directs the temple revenue towards public welfare. That's the reason it is important for the state to control the religious institutions. Then protection from commercialization, which means that it prevents the vested interest from exploiting the funds of the temples. So that's the reason it is important for the state to control. Now people who are against the state control, they say that religious freedom is a constitutional right. Every religious institution, they have the right to manage their own affairs, which means the state cannot intervene in the affairs of the state. Now unfortunately, political interference. Now the temple funds are often diverted for non-religious government projects rather than the government protecting or preventing the misuse of funds. The government itself is misusing the funds. Discriminatory. Why? Because only the Hindu temples face state control. Why the religious institutions belonging to Muslims and Christians or Sikhs are, let's say, protected from state control? This is discriminatory. So they say that state control should be done away with. Now, cultural autonomy, which means that the temples are not just place of worship, but they are the cultural centers that should be managed by the local communities instead of state. That's the reason this temple should be freed from the state control. So these are some of the points in favor of state control and against state control. I hope you understood the second topic as well. Now, the third topic talks about Lokpal. Let us try to understand what exactly is the context. Now, yes, the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, senior most judges, they have decided to closely examine whether judges of constitutional courts, that is Supreme Court and High Court, fall under the jurisdiction of Lokpal. Do the judges also fall under the control of Lokpal? Similar to, let's say, other functionaries like the Prime Minister, the ministers, the members of parliament, or let's say the bureaucrats like IS and IPS falling under the jurisdiction of Lokpal. So, do judges also fall under the jurisdiction? Control of Lokpal is something that the Supreme Court is looking into it. First and foremost, let us try to understand who is Lokpal or what is Lokpal? What exactly is Lokpal? See, Lokpal is a independent statutory body. What is it? It's a independent statutory body, which means it was made via an act, law. It investigates the corruption complaints against the public officials and institutions at the central level. It will investigate, it fights against the corruption. The public officials who are involved in corruption, the Lokpal will initiate investigation against the public officials as well as the institutions at the central level, talking about the central level, which means it ensures the accountability of the people who are working at the central level, right? It also ensures accountability, transparency, and most importantly, integrity, honesty in the administration of, let's say, administration of the country. Now, as part of, let's say, anti-corruption framework, right? As part of India's anti-corruption framework, the Lokpal, it works with the Central Vigilance Commission (CVC) and also the CB. So CVC, CBI, and Lokpal, they all fight against the corruption, which means corruption, which is a disease. So these institutions are responsible to fight against the corruption cases or reduce corruption in our country. Now, this act, this Lokpal was created via this act in the year 2013. It was passed in the year 2013 and it made Lokpal operational at the central level. At the state level, we have the Lok Ayukta. So, Lok Ayukta is for the state level and Lokpal for the central level. Now, selection. Now, who appoints the Lokpal? Now, Prime Minister, who acts as chairperson, then Speaker of Lok Sabha, Leader of Opposition in Lok Sabha, Chief Justice of India, and eminent jurist nominated by the President. So, please remember this selection committee, very, very important for your prelims examination. Make sure you remember these points for your prelims examination. Now, chairperson, a retired Chief Justice of India, a Supreme Court judge, or an eminent individual with anti-corruption expertise. So, Lokpal constitutes of a chairperson. And who will be a chairperson? Either retired CJI or a Supreme Court judge or an eminent individual. Members, there are 8 members, and out of 8 members, 50% should be from the judiciary and 50% should be from, let's say, from other streams like administration, etc. And of the total members, 50% should belong to SC, ST, OBC, minorities or women. So please remember each and every point. Each and every point is important for the examination. Now, who all fall under the Lokpal? Even the Prime Minister of the country, ministers, officials, that is the IS and IPS officers, also the private entities and NGOs, which means even the private companies who receive government funds above 1 crore, they also fall under Lokpal. So question can be, which of the following functionaries or let's say people are fall under the jurisdiction of Lokpal? So Prime Minister, Union Defence Minister, Supreme Court Chief Justice of India, and let's say an IS officer. As of now, the judges do not fall under the ambit of Lokpal. These are the people who fall under the ambit of Lokpal. I hope you understood the third topic. Next, Election Commission sets ball rolling, which means they have started the process of linking Aadhaar with the voter ID card. So, Election Commission has started the process to link what? The voter ID card with the Aadhaar number. So, what is this voter ID card? That is elector photo identity card, EPIC. The full form is elector photo identity card. So please remember this. So this voter ID card, the full form being EPIC, elector photo identity card, which is nothing but voter ID card. It is issued by the Election Commission. What is the purpose? To identify voters who are the genuine voters. It ensures voter authenticity during elections. So having the EPIC card, voter identity card, it actually validates your identity. It authenticates your identity. Then we have the Aadhaar card. Aadhaar, you know, we all have Aadhaar cards. So it's a 12-digit unique identification number. And it is issued by UIDAI, that is Unique Identification Authority of India. And it has got a legal backing, that is the Aadhaar Act of 2016 allowed the government or allowed the people to have the Aadhaar cards or the government to issue the Aadhaar cards. Now please remember, the purpose of voter ID card is to ensure that or to check the validity or let's say authenticity of voters. It checks the authenticity of voters, but when it comes to Aadhaar, it establishes identity and residency of individuals. Identity and residency of individuals based on biometric and demographic data. Now, historical context. In the year 2015, the Election Commission had started to link voter and Aadhaar, right? In the year 15, National Electoral Rolls Purification and this program, it launched to link this card with Aadhaar to remove the bogus voters. But the Supreme Court intervened in the year 2015, said that Aadhaar's or linking of Aadhaar is only allowed when it comes to social welfare schemes and PAN linking. You cannot link Aadhaar with the voter identity card. That's the reason this program was halted. Why? Because Supreme Court said that you cannot link voter ID card with Aadhaar. But in the year 2018, the Supreme Court said that yes, it is allowed. Now you can link voter with the Aadhaar card, which essentially means in the Putta Swamy judgment case, the Aadhaar linkage legally revived, which means now the Election Commission could link voter identity card with the Aadhaar card, right? So this law made in the year 2021, it changed, it amended this act to allow voluntary Aadhaar linkage, which means again the linkage of Aadhaar is not mandatory, it is up to the or it is as per the choice of let's say the voters. The voters can decide if they are to link their Aadhaar with the voter identity card. It is not mandatory, it is voluntary. Please remember this. Now, in the Puttaswamy judgment of 2018, where the Supreme Court allowed to link Aadhaar with the voter identity card, the Supreme Court said that right to privacy is a fundamental right, which means the Aadhaar linkage must be backed by law. That's the reason a law was framed in the year 2016, the Aadhaar Act of 2016, right? And then this judgment also reaffirmed that Aadhaar voter ID linkage is voluntary. Now, just because my voter ID card is not linked to Aadhaar or I do not have Aadhaar card does not mean the election officials will stop me from voting. If I don't have Aadhaar, I have just voter identity card, no one can stop me from voting. Now, why link voter ID with Aadhaar? Again, to remove the bogus voters. This you can read by your own. Now, Article 324, which means it is for the Election Commission of India. Now, under Article 324, Election Commission of India has been given power to look after the elections in our country. All the things associated with the elections, it is the Election Commission of India that looks after it, which means elections for Parliament, Vidhan Sabha, President, Vice President. Article 326 provides for universal adult suffrage, which means the citizens who cross the age of 18, above the age of 18, have the right to vote in the Indian elections, right? So please remember, only citizens are eligible to vote, only citizens. Now talking about the representation of, talking about the RPA Act of 1950. Now these are the sections. Now see, we discussed that the Election Commission of India is linking Aadhaar with voter identity card. This section of RP Act, which regulates the elections in our country, this act, it allows for correction, inclusion or deletion of names in the electoral rolls. So names that are mentioned in the electoral rolls are the names who can vote in the elections. So names can be added, deleted from the electoral rolls as per section 23. As per section 23 clause 5 empowers the election registration officers to request additional documents like Aadhaar. Let's say the electoral officers, in order to authenticate your identity, can request for Aadhaar card as well. Then this section 23 of subclause 6, it authorizes the central government to frame rules. So who has the power to frame rules when it comes to, let's say, making changes in the electoral rules? It is central government and not the state government. So this point is again very important for your presence. I hope you understood the fourth topic as well. Now the last topic, what is it about? Now, in May 2024, right, BSNL, right, a state-owned company, right, a telecom company, it hired Boston Consultancy Group. Boston Consultancy Group. Now, what is a consultancy group? It consults the companies who hire them. For example, we all know that the BSNL, they are making losses years after years. In order to revive the operations of BSNL, the BSNL has hired this consultancy group for 132 crores. Why? So as to develop a strategy through which BSNL can be revived. BSNL can be revived. But this has raised concern over the government's decision on the external consultancy groups. On the external consultancy groups. But lack of accountability. Now the consultancy group, they offer strategic advice, but they face no consequences, which means, let's say the consultancy group has given suggestions to BSNL. Despite giving all the recommendations, suggestions, if the BSNL company fails, then who should take the accountability? Who is responsible? No one is responsible. Which means even if the BSNL does not revive or fails to revive, this consultancy group will face no consequences. Which means, so BSNL has paid 132 crores to this group, and from where the BSNL has got money? From people like us who pay tax money or who pay taxes to the government. Erosion of state capacity, which essentially means that the state is relying more and more on the consultancy groups, and this actually prevents the skill transfer to government officials. It makes the public institutions dependent on the external groups rather than building in-house capabilities. So what is happening is that this consultancy group is sort of giving recommendation, but this is not helping the officials who are working for the state. The question is, how would the officials working for the state develop capabilities? Then there is also conflict of interest, which means that the consultancy groups, they often serve multiple clients. They do not have one client, they have multiple clients. Now this includes competitors and regulators, which means it raises concerns over biased recommendations. And this can actually compromise the integrity of the consultancy group as well as the, let's say, uh, the clients. Then mismatch of objectives, which means the private consultants, they focus on cost cutting, they focus on market efficiency. Now this may come in conflict with the public sector priorities, because for example, for a company like BSNL, the objective is not only to make profits but also to make sure, let's say, the telecom is deeply entrenched in the remote areas of a country. Now providing telecom services in the remote areas may not be beneficial or profitable, but this is what the state company is meant for. All right, and then alternative, what can be the alternative approach? The government should focus on strengthening the internal expertise, that is to build the capacities of the officials. How? Through recruitment, through training, through innovation. Which means it should allow the public enterprises like BSNL to regain autonomy over the operations of the company and to reduce dependence on the external consultancy groups. This is the essence of the topic. So these were the 5 topics that we expected to discuss. I hope you understood each and every topic. Now let us go through few questions. So first question, discuss the challenges posed by the informal labor market in India and critically examine the effectiveness of recent labor law reforms in addressing these challenges. Suggest a way forward for ensuring comprehensive social security for informal workers. Again, a very simple question, right? We have discussed each and every dimension. So in the introduction, discuss what is informal sector, the definition, the statistics associated with informal sector, and how the informal sector is contributes significantly to India's GDP, and why it is important to, let's say, bring reforms in the informal sector. Then please highlight the challenges in the informal sector, then highlight the labor codes, the 4 labor codes, highlight the loopholes in the labor codes, and finally the way forward. Very simple. Now these are the questions based on yesterday's DNA or yesterday's DNA. So let us go through these questions. First, wheat is primarily grown during the Kharif season. Wrong. It is grown in the Rabi season. So this one is incorrect, which means one, this is gone, this gone, this gone. Simple. So the ideal temperature is between 10 to 25. Yes. Uttar Pradesh is the largest wheat producing. Yes. Wheat is typically sown between March. No, it is harvested between March and April. It is sown in between October and December. So this one is also incorrect. So B is the correct answer. Next question, which of the following is not a function of CAG? Auditing all expenditures from the CFI, including those of UTs with legislative assemblies like Puducherry in Delhi. Yes, this one is correct. Advising the president on the format in which accounts of the union and states are to be maintained. Yes. Conducting performance audits of government schemes and programs to ensure efficiency. Yes. Which allocating financial resources and grants in aid to states. This is incorrect. It is not the job of CAG. So fourth one is not a function of CAG. Next question. The Code on Social Security establishes social security funds for gig, platform and unorganized workers including construction workers. Yes, this one is correct. The Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code 20. This is something that we have discussed in the first topic. It mandates that employers provide journey allowances for interstate migrant workers traveling from their home state to the work. Yes, this one is correct. Option C is the correct answer. And then we have these DNAs from today's DNA topic. So I request you to please go through these questions and open the DNA quiz in the comment section. This is the DNA quiz link. Open the link, attempt the questions and post the score in the comment section. I hope you understood all the topics that we have discussed in today's DNA. On this note, I'll call it a wrap. Thank you so much for watching.